A history of noncompliance can put you not just out of service for the instant, but can put you unsatisfactory, which means you can't operate at all.
Welcome to This Week in Trucking. My name is Caroline. Compliance is one of the biggest challenges for people who run smaller fleets. And most of the time, that's because they're also doing everything else that a trucking business needs, like booking loads and building relationships with customers and hiring drivers, or sometimes driving the truck themselves. So compliance can get easily overlooked. The quickest way to lose money in this industry is to get an out-of-service order from the DOT. And if you're not careful, too many dings on your safety records can lead to insurance being unaffordable or just completely inaccessible. So today we're talking to Rob Carpenter, VP of Compliance at TruckSafe. Rob, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me about your background in trucking.
So I started, 20 years ago as a truck driver. And then my goal was not to be, I grew up on a farm. So I had familiarity with anything diesel, equipment, trucks, etc. So went, got my CDL and moved on from there. Went and became a broker after that. And then really did that to learn the business, because you're only going to learn so much from a driver's seat. In order to learn the entire business, you kind of got to span it out because there's so many aspects to it. So went to become a broker, then went and managed some businesses, small businesses, large businesses, then bought one of those businesses because the owner was retiring, sold the business, and then I went into private equity enterprise management, overseeing 15 different DOT fleets across the country and for private equity, and then went into compliance after that. So it was one extreme to the other.
That's a long road to get there.
It is.
So what are the most common compliance mistakes that you see small fleet owners and owner operators making?
I think a lot of it starts at the framework of your whole program. I wouldn't say that there's necessarily like root level issues to start. The whole thing a lot of times is just bad because they don't have the information they need to get started. You don't have a new entrant audit generally until the first 18 months, right?
Right.
So if you operate for 12 months and then they come in at 12 months and are like, hey, it's more of an educational compliance review. We're going to kind of teach you something. Dude, I've been operating for 12 months this way. So I think the problem is partially that people go into this business a lot of times from a driver's seat, and they're so ignorant in some cases just to how they have to operate. Part of it is the ignorance factor, just not knowing. I think people look at ignorance like it's a bad word. It's just you don't know what you don't know.
No, when you say ignorant, you mean just lacking in information, not willfully ignorant. Just don't know.
And I think a lot of them are like that. And one of the attorneys I work with at TruckSafe, he's actually in one of the other companies they're kind of tied together, but Tyler Biddle. And one of the pieces that he focuses on is contracts for owner operators and people that are coming from the driver's seat, and how to review these contracts, whether you're leasing on with a carrier, and the common pitfalls that we as drivers make, not knowing, or a lot of times not necessarily not knowing, but just not reading the contract before you sign it. So there's so many things that go into going from the driver's seat to running and owning a company that I think a lot of us miss. From the driver's seat, especially if you have an entrepreneurial spirit, I'm running for this truck and this guy's making $6,000 a week off me. All I got to do is get my own truck and I'll make the $6,000 a week for myself. Nobody looks at how cash flow intensive the business is and how much you might net, which maybe nothing at this point. But I think there's so much unwillful ignorance, let's put it that way, not just from the compliance side, but from the whole operations piece. I think a lot of times we get in it thinking it's almost like a pipe dream, right? You think it's going to be great, and then it's great, but it's not as lucrative as you thought it was.
Can you tell me about a client that you've worked with at TruckSafe that, do you have any stories about a client that you've worked with that's like either a small fleet or an owner operator that made some pretty critical mistakes?
So we have them all the time. That's why they call us. So all of our stories are usually, heartbreaks.
Right.
And some of them are worse than others. A lot of people coming from the driver's seat don't realize that a history of noncompliance can put you not just out of service for the instant, but can put you unsatisfactory, which means you can't operate at all. And so many truck drivers miss those pieces of it. Just there's some one and done violations where you can lose your CDL immediately for one violation if you're hauling hazmat and you don't stop at a rail crossing. That's an immediate 60-day suspension if you're convicted. So a lot of people don't look at these one and dones and realize that, oh, they can actually put me completely out, whether it's as an imminent hazard or whether it's as an unsat rating. They can close your business. And some of those are the most heartbreaking instances. We just did one in Indiana. And when these happen, you have to come to people like us. You can do it yourself. It's going to take longer, but if you come to us, we can file your safety management plan and your upgrade request with FMCSA and try to get that unsat at least to an unrated. You might not get to satisfactory. You're probably going to get to conditional or unrated, but it'll at least get your doors back open.
You'll at least be able to continue operating.
Yeah. In this case, the most recent case that I'm referring to now, this was a 120 truck driver. That's 120 drivers that now have no work to do. So obviously they're not going to stick around and wait what could be 60 to 90 days for your upgrade request to go through while they don't work. So when you finally get that upgrade, one of the big issues you're going to have is, do you have the manpower to reopen your doors, even if you got the upgrade? So many people, I think, miss that piece of there is a real possibility you could be closed. And some of these violations it's going to take more of them. For instance, hours of service. You don't need very many hours of service violations to become unsat or conditional because they're double weighted. Their hours of service violations are double weighted compared to, say, a roadside violation for, a bald tire.
Does that mean that they're double weighted? Like they just matter when they're in the safety score system?
Yeah. So you have a scoring methodology within CSA, SMS, et cetera, that basically rates violations from like 0 to 10. And say you have an egregious violation of hours of service, a false log. They'll give you a 10. They'll put you out of service, which then adds more points to the 10, but it's double weighted. So instead of a 10, it's now a 20 plus 2 or plus 4. So there's different weights that go to these things, but all hours of service violations are double weighted. So they hit you harder, they hit you faster. So it doesn't take very many, which was the issue in this Indiana case, to close your doors. So that's a huge issue that I don't think a lot of people really think about. They just think, oh, I get the violation. Maybe they'll give me a $2,500 or a $5,000 or a $10,000 fine. It's just the cost of doing business. It may be the final cost of doing business, and you may not be able to do business anymore. It's not just that really hits you. If once you start getting these violations, you got to come up for renewal every year on your insurance. So when they run that cab report and they've got all this information, your premium goes to $35,000 a truck, if they'll even quote it. I think people generally getting started in the business don't understand those two key aspects that can just close your doors today.
And in your experience, are people you when they're already out of service?
Most of the time.
That's most of the time.
You have a time frame. Once you have, let's just say, a compliance review. You've had your compliance review. You're going to basically get your notice of claim and everything. And then what happens is you have so many days to respond. That means you can get these fines settled. You can get them cut in half. A lot of times we're successful at that. We have had cases where we got fines completely gone. And then there's other ways you can appeal these things. So if you exhaust that time frame and you don't have the time to appeal anymore, now you're stuck paying the full fine and you've got to file the upgrade. Upgrade requests take time. So generally between, I like to say 45 to 60 days at a minimum, but that's not realistic because the agency is wiped in terms of human resources. They don't have the capacity to manage the upgrades the way they should. So we just did one. I probably file more upgrade requests than we do anything else.
Can you describe what an upgrade request is?
So when you get that unsat rating, that notice of claim, and you've got your fine and you've got your 93-page long, disposition, basically it's going to say, based on the following acute and critical violations from this compliance review, we have decided to rate you unsat. And you're unsat generally if you're conditional in more than two basics. So 2 basics, you're unsat. When you're unsat, you're closed. And usually it's not immediate. Usually it takes 30 days. But once that ruling goes into effect, you're closed. You can't operate anymore. You can't move the tags to somewhere else, the lease on. You're just done. So at that point, the only thing you can do is petition the FMCSA to upgrade your rating from an unsat to either an unrated or a conditional. That'll get you back in business, but it's not guaranteed that it'll happen because you have to show that safety, basically the plan that you're using to propose this is the corrective action that I've taken to address every single critical and acute violation and every single system and process issue that I have so that this doesn't happen in the future. So that's essentially what you have to file to get that rating upgraded. And until they get it and then they approve it, you're not going to open again.
So what can carriers do to avoid getting to that stage so late in the game? Let's say I'm in a better, I don't have a great compliance program, but at least I haven't been given that unsatisfactory rating. How can I avoid that unsatisfactory rating?
So what's going to happen, you don't just get compliance reviews in general. Like they don't just show up at your door if you're doing everything you're supposed to do. They have to prioritize enforcement because they don't have a lot of people to prioritize enforcement. So when they focus on people, they have to focus on the most egregious people. So what they do is they look at your thresholds for your basic. Once you get over a certain threshold, let's just say for maintenance, you're probably going to get a letter and it's going to say, hey, Rob Carpenter, we've noticed that your fleet is over threshold on your basic category. If you don't clean this up, the next step may be we show up at your door and we do a full compliance review or a focus compliance audit. And in those cases, basically, you have the opportunity to fix it. Now, it's not to say that they won't show up without that notice, but generally that's how it flows. So before you can get to that piece, you kind of see that your record is getting funny, right? And you realize that you're being pulled over more. And it's kind of this vicious cycle because the more violations you get, the worse your ISS score gets and the more times you get pulled over. So it's imperative that people have good workflows, good systems, good processes in place from the beginning. And if they don't know what they are, then they need to call somebody that does. So whether that's TruckSafe, FleetWorthy, or another consultant, that it can actually say, hey, we help you by doing the following things. And it's good to have that anyway, because when they come for their new entrant, they're going to want to see that you have foundations in place to manage a good program. If you don't, you're not going to manage a good program. So that's essentially all you can do is just run as compliant of a system as you can.
If you're a one truck operation, you know when you get a violation. Right?
Absolutely.
Like it's really clear. If you have a couple of trucks, as the owner, you might not notice a violation because it's somebody else driving your truck. How can those owners stay up to date on what violations hit their MC?
So one of the important things to consider is technology in this entire process. So one of the pieces of technology that exists, whether a lot of times it's built into Samba Safety, whether you're doing continuous license monitoring on your drivers, it's built in there and it'll notify you that, hey, you have a CSA violation, you have a whatever. And that's essentially how you can do it with almost any system. So a lot of ATF systems, 10th Street, they have the same thing. A lot of these companies are getting to the point where they've integrated with FMCSA and that data is coming through once a month to say, hey, your driver, Rob Carpenter, got a violation in Texas on the 19th. You're thinking, wait a minute, I don't have this Aspen disposition form for my driver. Where is it? So that's when you contact your driver to say, hey, you got this violation. Why didn't you tell us about this? That's really important from a tech perspective. It basically tells on everything for you. You don't have to track it. Now, if you don't want to buy all that stuff, you can still do it the old fashioned way. Put it on your calendar every 30 days to go in and check your FMCSA profile to see if you've had any violations past 30 days.
Right.
Or any crashes in the past 30 days that haven't been reported. So that's really how you keep tabs on everything. But I think for me, even when I owned my fleet, we didn't have tech like that. So I would check every 30 days. And then if I didn't have the form, then I would have to get it. And generally they have to be signed and sent back in to say that you know and you've corrected it. But that's generally how I've found out. And a lot of good things about tech is you can usually get almost everything you need from one vendor if you pick the right vendor. You don't have to go and, I go to some people and it's like, what do you use for cameras? Well, we use this. What do you use for MBRs? I use this. And before you know it, they got 15 different vendors where they could have just got one to do all of it. So fewer vendors, the better for me, because it just makes for a more scalable program and it's something easier for you to manage.
Who are your favorite vendors in that aspect?
So everybody asked me this. It's probably my most requested thing, and I can't tell you directly. Usually what I tell people is there's no cookie cutter approach to any of it. If you have one truck, don't buy any of it. You don't need a Motive, you don't need a Samsara. Go buy a non-recurring Nexar or a Garmin for your truck and get yourself a manila folder and use your calendar. You don't need any more than that, unless you have the intention of needing a scalable program in the future.
If you're planning to buy a bunch of trucks in the
Yes.
near future, you should
Or
have a
test.
system in place.
Yeah. And in those cases, if I know that your intention is to grow, and then don't start with a manila folder and a
Sure.
garment, because it's not going to be scalable in the future. Now, if you're a larger fleet, enterprise fleets like I had, where you had 104 terminal managers across the country, if you don't have the automation and the scalability and the integrations that are built in, you'll never manage this effectively, and you'll have huge wasted labor issues because you'll need 5 different people to help you. So in those operations, I look for the all-in-ones. Higher rate is a good one because anything you need, from drug and alcohol to MBRs to criminal background, you can get it all from them. Checker is another one. Pretty much equal to higher rate. They can do everything I just said, just like higher rate can. Even if you add in like fit for duty, say you've got some flatbed folks that you want to add in fit for duty testing, all you have to do is turn it on. The good thing about higher rate is it integrates with systems like 10th Street, where 10th Street can do all of those things, and you can use 10th Street to basically do all of the ordering through higher rate, all in the same system. And then you've got Motive. So Motive is an all-in-one. A lot of people say, well, what's the difference between Motive and Netrodyne? Netrodyne has a great camera. There's no argument there. The difference really between the two, they run pretty much on the same AI compressor from a visual perspective. The difference between the two is Netrodyne runs a camera. That's it. They have coaching, but that's it. When you go to Motive, you've got fuel card, you've got camera, you've got ELD, etc. So when I start thinking about how to manage a program, I look at the 7 basics, and I basically give this out to whoever. I've got a mind map that kind of shows you what flows together and who the best vendors are for what size fleet you have. And that's not just the cookie cutter approach, right? Like 10th Street is comparable to, say, Driver Reach. They have more stuff than Driver Reach, and they're comparable with Fleetworthy and Hall. So it's not just one. There's others out there. It's just those are the ones that I've found that integrate the best, and they function well together.
Cool. What if I'm operating like between 5 and 15 trucks? Like maybe I just have one lot. I've got, maybe a dozen drivers.
Only based on cost, I would go with something like Hall for ATS. So bringing up, basically storing all your driver data, storing your vehicle data. It's not overly expensive. You're not paying $10,000 a month for a 10th Street because you don't need it, but it'll help you do a lot of the same functionality. And with 20 trucks, you don't need all the integrations that you need with somebody with 5,000. So I would say Hall, Motive or Nexar, or Netrodyne. And it also depends on short haul too, right? Because if you don't need ELD, you can just say, right, I don't really need all the bells and whistles of Motive. I'm going to go with Netrodyne, and I'll just run timesheets. So it's all suspect based on this, how you census your fleet. So census your fleet, figure out what you need, figure out what you want, and then kind of blend it together. But I would say just for that size fleet, the quick and dirty rundown of all Netrodyne or Motive, and then higher rate or checker.
Cool. And for people who are just thinking about entering this business, starting a trucking business, can you talk a little bit, give us a quick rundown of the 7 basics, what that means, and what are some of the more common areas where you see violations?
So the big ones are maintenance, and part of the reason is there's so much that's consolidated under maintenance. Maintenance isn't just your tires and your lights, but it's also load securement issues fall under maintenance category, which is a huge problem. So all of those things fall under maintenance, and a lot of people just don't maintain their trucks. It's just, hey, set it and forget it. My diesel will run as long as I put diesel in it. And that's just not the mindset that you have to have. You've got to develop some predictive maintenance model in your head to say, my tires are only good for 100,000 miles. I'm at 80. Maybe I need to start looking at that. So maintenance is a huge one, which again, all of these have their own thresholds, and every threshold is different. So you've got maintenance, which is a big one. Hours of service is huge because it's double weighted. And it's got so many petty violations that can easily add up because they're double weighted. So even if you have, say it's not a false log, say it's just something as simple as, I don't have my ELD manual. That can be a high point value violation just because you weren't organized. There's some more that are egregious, obviously, true falsification of logs. So maintenance, hours of service, drug and alcohol is almost non-existent because nobody does drug and alcohol testing on the side of the road. Generally only going to get those violations if in a compliance review, but I have seen a lot on the roadside. It's just not as many. So drug and alcohol, maintenance, hours of service, crash, hazmat, driver fitness and unsafe driving. So unsafe driving is a huge problem because that's usually like the gateway drug, right? So they don't necessarily know that your ELD is bad. They don't know that you don't have one. They don't know that your log is false. If you go by them and they see that your truck is either not well maintained or you're going 10 over the speed limit, like that maintenance issue that's so obvious, or that behavior is so obvious, that they pull you over and then they get you for a lot of other things.
It's indicative of things that might not be visible, might not be observable at first.
A lot of the advice I give for this international road check that happens every year, it's clean your truck. Just wash your truck and make sure it's spotless. Because if I'm in FMCSA, if I'm in commercial enforcement, whether it's a state partner or DOT, and you come through and you have a spotless, chrome shined, brand new Peterbilt that's going to mats, and then I have a log truck pull up next to me that's caked with mud, tires are half bald, I'm going to go where I feel my time is best spent. Where am I going to get the most violations? Probably not from that Peterbilt guy. He's clean. So a lot of it goes to just how you look and how you behave, how often you're going to get pulled over. Now, that's not necessarily true if you have a high ISS score. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of people don't understand. What is an ISS score? So ISS scores are 0 to 100. The closer you are to 0, the less likely you are to get pulled over. When they run your DOT, you're going to get a score. When you go through the scale, they're going to see your score. So if your score is a 98, you have to get pulled in. So 75 to 100 is a must pull. I think it's 50 to 75 is an option. And then 0 to 50 is just let them go. So when you get into that scale, and every time all the way down 95 from Virginia to Florida, pull in, bring in your logs, there's a reason there. They're not just doing it because they dislike you. They're doing it because they dislike the DOT number on the side of the truck. Your behavior historically affects that ISS number. So the more violations you historically have, the higher that number gets.
How can I check my ISS score?
You can log into FMCSA. It's not public data, but we pay for it. So even though it's not public, people can buy it, just like with your cab report for insurance. So if you think, if I don't let them log in, the insurance people can't see my ISS score, or they can't see what basics I'm in alert status, we pay for that through a company called Carrier Software that gives us all your back-end data, including your email and your phone number. And that's why you get all these phone calls as Carrier, because people buy that data. Essentially, that's how you can go in and check it. And then from there, if you see something erroneous in there that's not yours, like when we spoke a few minutes ago about you get the violation or your driver doesn't tell you about it, you can data queue these violations. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about at MATS is it's not so much about compliance at MATS. It's more of a focus on how you can get rid of the violations that aren't yours or that aren't accurate or weren't justified. And then how you can keep your trucks on the road, long term. Why compliance is important.
Tell us about that, because I'm not going to be able to make it to MATS this year. So I want to hear all about what you're going to talk about, because I'm going to miss you on the stage.
So what was important for me for MATS is I'm an old school truck driver, right? So it's like my Twitter handle is still white smoke, and it's white smoke because I didn't obey any of the rules when I drove. A lot of people are that way, but what I wanted to have is something that bridged the absence of compliance mindset to the operations side. And I wanted to have people understand why compliance is important. Even to this day, I get a lot of, I can't believe it. You're a trader. You jumped over to the compliance side. And it's,
oh man,
the thing with compliance is it's like the necessary evil, right? Like I'm not in love with it, even though I do it. But at the end of the day, it's what keeps you in business. So whether you look at it from a safety mindset, like, hey, I'm here to preserve life and property, which is the ethical, moral way to look at it, or if you're looking at it from an operations model that says, hey, I'm just doing this to stay in business. I don't care so much how you look at it. You just have to understand that the compliance model that you decide is going to determine your longevity in the business. If you want to run successful and you want to continue running every year with the lowest premiums possible or running at all, that's what's important. So there is definitely a bridge between compliance and operations, and I think a lot of people fail to understand it.
Talk about the data queue process. We've heard about this before. We have another compliance expert that came on to do a workshop with us once and talked a little bit about the data queue process. But basically, from my understanding, it's you get a violation that's not actually yours. Like you can see, or you can talk with your driver, that wasn't me, that didn't happen. Or no, actually the officer misunderstood. That's not true. And I have the evidence to back it up. What can you do?
So you get different, I'll break it down in two different ways. One, you can have violations. So let's just say I just got one that was And I didn't think I was going to beat it because I never beat one of these. So I filed a lot of these for other people. This guy's driver had a handheld phone use violation. And I told him up front, like, I'll do it, but the odds are not good. So I filed it. And what I filed it with was an argument that his cell phone record showed that he was not using that phone in any way, shape, or form at that time. We used GPS from his telematics system to show where he was, at what time, when he got this violation, and he was not on this phone any time in the previous 20 minutes. Not text, call, internet, nothing. So we beat it. And what happens is you file this with FMCSA, you log in just like you would to look at your ISS, you find the violation that you want to argue, and then you submit your evidence, and you make that argument. Now, what's bad about data queue is there's no due processing. So I say this, it's not like you're going in front of some objective judge that knows nothing about it. The very first person to review this is the guy who wrote you the violation to begin with. Seems just, right? So they're more often than not and most likely going to get denied, at least on the front end. Sometimes if it's so blatant it was wrong, they'll just get rid of it. Then you can refile again, and you can take these all the way to the court level and fight them, but most people don't because it's expensive. So unless it has serious bearing, they're not going to do that. So the second time it goes up, it goes to the supervisor of the person that wrote it, which still isn't much better, but it is a little more objective. So that's how a data queue flows. And then there's correspondence in that portal between you and the officer, and that's it. So you can submit dash cam footage, you can submit all kinds of arguments, photos, whatever you want. That's the gist of it. The second part of the data queue program is was this crash preventable? It shouldn't be on my record. It wasn't my fault. Somebody committed suicide by jumping into the front of my truck. Those you can go in and file basically a crash preventability determination and say, here's all the evidence. Here's the camera of this guy jumping in front of me. It wasn't my fault. Nothing I could do to prevent it. And in those cases, they'll rule on those just like they would any other data queue. But in this case, it's to have crashes removed from your crash register, which helps your crash basic. But ultimately, it really helps your insurance premiums at the end of the year because the fewer crashes that are on that record obviously help you. So that's the program in a nutshell. But they were implementing an appeals board. They talked about this maybe 2 years ago. 2 years ago, we still don't have an appeals board. We don't know anything about this appeals board. We just know that there's going to be one. Supposedly, it's not there yet. So the good thing about the crash preventability program is you were restricted to so few crashes that you could argue. Now they've expanded that a lot. So it's gotten a lot easier to file preventability challenges in data queue. So that's essentially how that works. But really your goal is to try to get some of these violations and crashes removed to lower your threshold to make you look better.
If you were the head of DOT, what changes would you make to the trucking compliance system?
I know a little bit about what's been going on in the past couple of months in terms of selection, and there was a lot of people that were chosen to be the FMCSA administrator, and from what I understand, like the first 6 turned it down. And part of the reason that right now we have an acting one that was named this week, but part of the reason no one wants this job is FMCSA was already taxed. It had less than 1,000 people working there. They do not have the human resources to manage the number of people they have to manage in terms of compliance. There's a lot of
no kidding. How many carriers are there in the US? Like hundreds of.
And 1,000 people are doing all the work for FMCSA. So
that's wild.
Completely understaffed. And now what's making it worse is a lot of them have taken buyouts. Under the new administration, a lot of them have been laid off. A lot of them have taken buyouts. A lot of them have chosen early retirement. So now we don't know the numbers yet, but we know it's a lot less than 1,000. So we don't know what's going to happen, but essentially you're going to have to rebuild the agency. And one of the things that I've looked at is using third parties. You know, they used to use third parties under contract a lot, like us. They don't do it so much anymore. But that's one of the things, basically build your army with external people. If you don't have the people, you don't have the capacity to meet the volume demands, then just like trucking, you've got to find another way to either artificially inflate your capacity or you've got to reduce your volume. And that was, what you got to do. So for me, that's pretty much where I would start, is start trimming it down and really use the FMCSA as an oversight agency while you're letting other people basically manage the day-to-day tasks of reviewing people for compliance. The problem with that is you have to trust the third parties that you select, and not all of them are the best.
Trustworthy. Yeah. Right.
So it opens it up to a lot of different things like bribes, which is common, and things like that. So I don't know what the answer is. That's just what my answer is.
I think it's a thoughtful answer. And somebody who thinks they know all the answers to everything is never the best person for the job. So yeah, I don't know. Would you, if you were offered that job tomorrow, would you take it?
Probably.
All right. You hear that?
Yeah.
All right, let's try to get this message out. Comment below if you want Rob to be the head of the FMCSA.
I had gotten a call from somebody who was selected and turned it down. So I understood what's going on in the selection process. And I kind of know who turned it down, and I kind of know who was like option G, option K.
Wow.
So the funny thing about the process for selection that I found was that I didn't like who got to make that decision. There were like third-party people who had nothing to do with government that had their hands in making the decision on who this person was going to be.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I've always disliked about, and maybe it's the truck driver in me that says, why do we have people working in the FMCSA that have no practical knowledge beyond book sense? And that's a lot of the cases. We had an auditor last year who was a new auditor. He'd only been finished and completed training for 60 days. He was a Papa John's delivery driver before he was an FMCSA auditor. So it's, yes, you have 1,000 people, but how effective are the 1,000 people? Even if you train them, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I still don't know probably 50% of what there is to learn, because there's so much in like methodologies in terms of scorings and ratings that you have to pick up. And he'll probably learn it pretty quick if he's still there, because he does it every day. But it's a tough job. And I think I don't know that the woman who just took it, we have actually talked a couple times. I think she's going to be on our Truck Safe podcast.
Cool.
I like her. I just don't know. She comes from the Federal Highway Administration, which is a better run agency because they don't have the chaos that FMCSA has. I'm interested in seeing how that plays out.
Yeah. Definitely. Good luck to her. Yeah, it's a tough job. And I do think that it's good to have people in those agencies. It just makes sense to have people in those agencies that have industry experience. And you need a diverse group of people that have all the different skills that you would need. And it sounds like they need a lot more power to be able to, a lot more manpower, I should say, to just address all the concerns that people have and make trucking compliance something that is understandable and usable for the industry, because we really can't run this industry without really good governance.
Yeah, and part of that good governance is the problem that we have. It's not necessarily between one administration and the next, but since we're in 2020, obviously, but since 2020, we've had 8 different administrators at the FMCSA.
Yeah.
So if you think that a 4-year term for a president can't change anything, how much time do you think 6 months as an administrator is going to change it? It's difficult to change from one administrator to the next on a constant basis and just constant revolving leadership and actually expect something better, because they're going to leave and then the next one's going to come in and think they can do a better job and change it all the way up. And then you had an issue with one of the past administrators who proposed a speed limiter rule that everyone hated, including me. And then they found out that she had some backdoor dealings on that. So the speed limiter deal went away, and so did she. It's just a mess.
Yeah.
So I think taking on the role, the good part about it for me would be someone who's already taken large businesses across the country and then developed them into successful systems. And I think that's what you need. And maybe that's her coming from the Federal Highway, and maybe that's why they chose her. I don't know. But I think some of the leadership issues have to be resolved before you're going to see real change.
Definitely. Tell me about speed limiters, your thoughts on them, why you think they're a bad idea.
Speed limiters it's a heartburn topic. So I don't like speed limiters for the reason that I think speed kills a lot of people every year. No question. Not arguing that at all. What I am arguing is 80% of commercially involved crashes that involve commercial vehicles are 80% of the time it's the fault of the non-commercial vehicle, not the commercial vehicle. That's a true study. That's not something Rob made up and truck drivers talk about that just came out of thin air from the truck stop, rumor mill. That's a true study. So my thought process in that is, one, it's not the commercial drivers, commercial vehicles issue anyway. It's actually starting at the 4-wheeler level, just regular vehicles. The second part of it is to be a truck driver, especially if you're in Colorado or some parts of California, especially Washington State, you need to be able to overtake other vehicles. So it's difficult if you look at California, per se, that's stuck at 55 for the entire state if you're a tractor trailer. So that state has a lot of crashes. Because you have a lot of trucks impeding traffic, which are making cars mad. And then you've got road rage, and then you've got a number of other issues. So speed might not be their problem, but slow speed is their problem.
Mm-hmm.
So speed limiters I had an issue with because I'm just not in favor of taking that much control away from a truck. Sometimes they need that control. The other one that was proposed at the same time was the auto braking feature. And I can see how that's helpful because obviously if you've got a forward collision warning, it's going to say, hey, you've got this happening, you need to stop. One of the things that I still do is I drive like prototypes or brand new vehicles from factory. So I'm not going to tell you what make this was, but I picked it up in Virginia and I'm coming up on a red light, maybe 300 feet away. As a human, and I can't knock autonomous because most of the autonomous people, companies are our clients, but I'll say this. I, as a human, could recognize that in 300 feet, I see the blinker of the car is making their turn, and as I get closer, there's a little tail end of their car hanging out. Truck completely locks up, unexpected. You don't know what's going to happen. And if I wasn't prepared, like with my hands on the wheel, I would have wrecked simply because the truck decided to stop because it doesn't have the human element to say, not yet anyway, to say, hey, this car is it's going to be okay. The car is going to finish its turn. I could judge that, but the radar in the truck couldn't judge. So I think for now, it's kind of like the robo-taxis of Cruise and Waymo that cause the catastrophes out west in SFO and Arizona where they're not there yet. So maybe private tracks until you figure it out 100%, but I don't think it's there yet. I don't know.
Yeah. I sometimes think that the autonomous trucking conversation gets a little confused as if we're going to go either completely driver controlled or completely AI, general AI controlled. I don't think it's ever, first of all, it's not completely driver controlled anymore at all. There's like cruise control. You're not controlling the speed then, but you can override it and it's like an interaction between the human and technology. And maybe there's a little bit of a shift in the sort of gradient that gives from total human control to total AI control. But I think that people misunderstand it in thinking that, we should try to do AI controlled all the way 100% tomorrow. No. I think that there's going to be a transition there where you should be all, maybe human judgment and computer judgment are just augmenting each other, not completely overriding human judgment. That seems like a dangerous step to take too soon. And I don't think that anyone is suggesting that we do that too soon. Or maybe they are. I don't talk to a lot of autonomous trucking companies.
I think you're seeing it a lot more in cars because I think people think cars can only do so much damage. Waymo and Cruise is a good example because they got pretty much, unrestricted access to just run your completely driverless vehicle around town and let it run into fire trucks and kill people and catch fire and all kinds of things without any kind of repercussions. And that's one piece, but I don't hear it happening in trucks. So we have clients that run autonomous vehicles, but they run them on straight shoots, making long-term beer deliveries or, from, let's just say Dallas to New Mexico, which is a straight shot. They're not going into any kind of close quarters of inner city or anything like that. And then you also have things like piloted vehicles like Beep. So Beep is down. They're in a lot of places now. They're in Yellowstone Park. They're in Florida and a lot of places. But Beep has no driver in it, but it is piloted by a remote driver. You're going around a closed loop, like at the mall or at, let's just say, the Mayo Clinic. They're picking you up at the parking lot. It's going to one location and it's coming right back. So I think right now, from a commercial perspective, most of that's already kind of planned, but it's targeted, right? Like they're not throwing it in downtown New York. So it'll get there. It's just not there yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Rob, it was awesome talking to you. Thank you so much for making the time to come on This Week in Trucking. Lots of really cool insights. Is there anything else that you want to share?
I don't think so. Hopefully we'll see everybody else but you at Matt's now.
I know. I'm bummed. We did go last year. We had a blast. And I wish we were going again this year. We're going to miss out, but we will check out the recordings that come out of it, and we'll definitely post yours. And if it's already out by the time we publish this, then I will put it in the description. We'll also put the website to TruckSafe in the description. If you liked this video and you like listening to conversations like this and learning stuff about the trucking industry, make sure you subscribe to This Week in Trucking and give us a like. Also, if you have questions for Rob about trucking compliance or, I don't know, anything else, like where he got his hat, go ahead and put that in the comments and we will send those questions to him, get you answers. So thanks so much for joining us and drive safe, everybody.